Yo, what up, party people? Welcome to episode number 290 of Should I Start a Podcast? Coming up in today's episode, learn how business owners go about getting their next 1,000 listeners, understand how to create an amazing experience for the guests you interview, how to resuscitate the listeners that haven't engaged in a while. We're going to take a deeper look at doing things on video, what it means to do it, and how you can create stuff on video with your podcast. We answer an audience question, actually multiple audience questions about growing an audience. One is for a fitness brand, one is for a podcast. We ask you to rethink a few things in here, especially video platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And we also converse with a gentleman about working backwards, how to first have a vision and then create the podcast. And also, finally, we talk in depth about how to improve, get more downloads and more listeners for your show. All this and more on this week's episode of Should I Start a Podcast? By the way, make sure you listen all the way to the end because I'll break down this episode to give you 3 small steps you can execute right now to help you take this listening experience into an execution experience. Enjoy the show.
Indicator 1, this is launch control. Please advise when pre-flight checklist is complete.
Indicator 1 to control. Pre-flight is complete. All indicators read green.
This is Should I Start a Podcast? A show for business owners looking for tips, tricks, and ingenious hacks when it comes to growing a business using their podcast. This is your host, Ronsley. He's interviewed more than 1,400 people and has been listened to over 5 million times in 133 countries. A TED speaker, author, and a podcast purist who believes that we can use our voices to grow our business and our influence. You know, because every conversion in any business always happens in a conversation. And now, Ronsley.
Welcome, everyone. It's really cool to have you here. You're listening to Should I Start a Podcast Club? I'd love to talk about your next 1,000 podcast listeners. We're all podcasters here. Just as podcasters, if we can just have a conversation around what is the way for us to get our next 1,000 podcast listeners. It would be a super valuable conversation for me. All right, Kevin, how are you?
Hey, how's it going? So I guess for me, let's tell you where to get your next 1,000 podcast listeners. The way I would think about it, the way I've done it, I always tell people it's I just see literally will message all my friends to say, hey, listen to my podcast. That's a great one. At least that's helpful in the beginning when you have nobody listen to it. And at least the other way I've done it, which is I guess people should be doing right now if you want to have a podcast, it's really building up some sort of email list or some sort of membership list where you can have listeners or people coming to you that already listen to your stuff. So for us here, we have a Facebook group of marketers or online people that kind of already are into this space. And that group already has about 5,000 members. So whenever we release a new episode or when we first started our podcast 2 years ago, we just put it out on that group. And that was super helpful because we used it as a way to launch a podcast. And the way we used it was we just asked them hey, we're launching a podcast soon. What type of questions or type of content would you be interested in listening to about Facebook ads or marketing? And essentially those topics were what we used to launch about 10 episodes. And that's kind of how we did it there. But another way that works really well is kind of partnering with people in the space and interviewing them, and then just sort of using their email list as a way to get more subscribers or listeners to your podcast. So those are a few ways I would think about it.
Kevin, great stuff in there and super excited to be here and be part of the chat today. My name's James Whitaker, host of the Win the Day with James Whitaker podcast. And Rons and I have a business called We Are Podcast, where we help podcasters make money from their show so they can make the world a better place. We've actually got an event coming up later this week, which is going to be a game changer. So you can go to wearepodcast.com or click the link in mine or Rons's bio to learn more about that. Like Kevin, my goal for the next 1,000 podcast listeners is about people. It's about the transformation, more specifically, that I can create for the guest who comes on the show. So first of all, it's figuring out who is a really good guest for the show, making sure that they have an amazing experience by me beforehand, doing the preparation, doing the research, making sure I'm not asking them the same 1,000 questions that they have been asked on a whole bunch of different things, and giving them really good, engaging, unique content that they can go and share with their audience. And I've found that if I can give them that great content and make it as easy as possible for them to go and share it, and really let yourself really just put your hands back and say, cool, here is the content for you to do whatever you want with it. Here are the channels that I'm going to share it on. And if you can do that and then follow up in about 3 or 4 days' time, if you haven't heard from them, which will happen in probably at least 80% of the time, follow up with them in a few days' time to say, look, just checking in to see what you thought of the episode, to make sure that you received the below email, something like that. And if you do that, they're going to be incentivized to promote it because you've given them great, ideally video assets. And in my experience, has been very, very powerful. You've got a great relationship with them. You can connect them with other high-level people who you know about, and you can also ask them for 1 or 2 people in their network who could be a great fit for your podcast, which enables you to share those new people's message and mission with the world because you have given that initial person a really great experience. So that's my plan. If you do that, you can activate the mailing list, you can activate the social media followings, and I believe, in my experience, again, I can't speak for anyone else, that is what I have found to be the best way to build an audience really, really quickly.
And thank you, Kevin and James. And while I know Kevin and James mentioned what they're currently doing, I'd love for, when we come back around, if we do have time, what you do differently from what you're already doing for the next 1,000 listeners would be something super interesting for me to have a conversation around. We'll come back to that. But Anna Vicino, how are you?
I'm doing fantastically well. Hi, I'm Anna Vicino, and I am a voice talent and a podcast co-host / producer / clubcast producer now, thanks to Ronsley. Good Lord. You get me involved in all sorts of things. I think this is a wonderful topic because if you've been podcasting for any length of time, or if you're brand new to podcasting, there's always a concern of where are our next 1,000 listeners going to come from? What is that thing that we can do? And there's all sorts of strategies and tactics for sure. And hopefully many of which you'll get today. I always like to back it up a little bit and look at what is the overall thinking behind the podcast. For example, where I am in the podcast life cycle with Fitness Confidential, podcasting with Vinny Tortorich. We've been doing this for 9 years and we're in the health and fitness space. And while we do our level best to entertain ourselves while we're podcasting, as well as get some information out there in each episode, we interview experts. We have stuff just with us. We go over what's in the news. There's no shortage in the health and fitness industry of absolute, utter horse shit. So we have lots that we can cover. However, what we're basically doing is rehashing a version of the following 2 pieces of information. Number 1, move your body. Number 2, cut out processed sugars and grains. So when you really boil it down, yes, there are all sorts of angles and all sorts of things we can talk about. But after 9 years and 10,000 hours, or however many episodes, we're not in 10,000 episodes, but after how many hours of doing this, it is a concern. Number 1, first of all, think about what I like to think of as who have we lost? You know how they say in regular sales, if you have an e-commerce business, it's actually a lot less expensive to salvage a customer that you already have than it is to go out and spend money obtaining new customers. It's the same thing with podcasts. And sometimes people just fall by the wayside. They forget about you. They have a life. Can you imagine people having a life, not listening to the podcast? And obviously in the past year, we've had this whole pandemic thing. So I think that there are ways that you should be exploring how to resuscitate the folks who maybe have gone away and getting them back engaged and figuring out ways to do that. And then for me, a really specific thing that I've done in the past month is start to, Vinny and I are now taping our Zooms. So we have a YouTube version of it, not just the iTunes or Stitcher or whatever. I'm the cooking portion of the show. Usually we just sit and talk like radio hosts. And I have taken to, you know what, I'm going to set up the camera and cook a meal while we discuss this stuff. Now I have the skill set to be able to do that. But what is something that you have the skill set of doing that you could maybe do on camera while you're actually podcasting or while you're interviewing somebody, or something that they could be doing, something you could be doing together? Just a thought. I know cooking is a very specific thing to what I'm doing, but it's something that's actually increased engagement because people hear the podcast on iTunes and then they're like, oh, I want to go see what she's making. Because what I do is I actually kind of tease it out and I say, I'm not going to put the actual recipe in the show notes. You have to go and either listen and pause it and write it down, or you have to watch it. And actually people like the game of that. So just want to throw that out as a suggestion.
I find that every time I hear you speak, I wish you could hear me laughing on this side and you could see me laughing at least and know that your jokes are landing.
Oh, God bless you, Ronsley. My ego needed that today. So thank you.
So good to have you. And everyone that's joining us, you're listening to Should I Start a Podcast Club? If you're obviously here, you're thinking of starting a podcast, or you're thinking of your next 1,000 podcast listeners. And actually, you'll find a whole bunch of really cool stuff on iTunes under Should I Start a Podcast. It's a podcast that I've been hosting for, I don't know, I say donkey's years, but it's been a while. Anyway, would love to hear Ria's voice. Ria, how are you? Would love to hear your voice.
Hi, I'm good. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to come on here since I recently rebranded my podcast and I'm shifting the conversation to be more towards my target audience for my actual brand, my personal brand. I'm taking it like a little bit more seriously than I was before I rebranded. So I'm like very not new, but I would love to hear just any sort of general advice, any general tips on growing audience, because at first it was basically just like a fun thing, but now I'm very like dedicated in getting my message out to as many people, and I'm struggling with that. For the most part, I'm leveraging my personal brand and my existing followers and kind of redirecting them, but at the same time, that's a little difficult in itself. So I would just love to hear anything that anyone has to say, just generally.
Thanks, Ria. We'd like some context. So what I'd love is if you can tell us what your personal brand is, what your podcast is, and what are you moving into. That would help a lot. And who are you targeting as well with your listeners?
Yeah. So my personal brand is fitness and self-development, marketed towards other young women like myself who need some sort of direction or guidance in the fitness self-development niche. And my actual brand, like where I profit off of, is a fitness and self-development brand where I just sell apparel, activewear, and like workout guides. And my podcast, it used to be where I interviewed and had guests on the show, fellow founders and fellow entrepreneurs. But now I'm kind of rebranding it to be more of a solo podcast where I speak on what I believe my target audience, again, with a young woman into fitness or into self-development as a whole, and giving them some guidance, some pointers, and tips to be generally more confident in their own skin, if that context at all helps you.
Amazing. No, it helps. Massively helps. Thank you. I'd love the rest of the team to take the question over if you'd like. What I'd love to just reiterate from the last few weeks, because I've been doing these rooms for a while, and this month especially, I've been doing rooms on increasing podcast listeners or podcast audience or downloads and that kind of stuff. And one of the things, especially because you're in the rebranding stage, that comes up every single time, it comes up all the time, it is probably the most important thing, is having a great show, right? Lots of movies that have spent millions and billions of dollars, not billions, millions of dollars on creating it, but it never takes off because it's a shit movie. And what tends to happen when people think of podcasts are, oh, I already have a podcast, now let me get downloads or let me get listeners. And sometimes you just have a shit podcast and no more people want to listen to it. So I think the idea here that I'm trying to land, Ria, is just now that you're in this stage of rebranding, like, I'm glad that you're at a position where you want to use your voice and speak solo. It might be solo, it might be however you like it to be, but I'm glad that you're kind of going, this is my stance. I want my audience around it. I love that idea. I'd also love the rest of the panel to chime in. Thank you.
Yeah, I can offer something here, Ron's and Ria. And what Ron said there is 100% bang on. And I think probably not as direct as what you would find other people say. So he's saying that from a position of great experience. I think activewear is something you need to be very, very, very careful of. That, I believe clothing and restaurants are the two toughest businesses in the entire world. As someone who had a former activewear company that by many metrics was very, very successful. We sponsored people in the CrossFit Games, Olympic Games, and Commonwealth Games. It's a very, very difficult thing to crack when there are companies out there that can produce and sell a shirt or some type of other activewear garment for something like $5. It's very, very, very tough to compete with that. If I'm in your situation, Ria, I'd be thinking about two things. I'd be thinking about, what can I do to build my tribe of 10 raving fans? What can I do to give 10 people an amazing transformation in a way that also helps you generate a little bit of revenue? So I think having some type of product, like more of a digital product that you can scale, give people some type of community aspect, some type of coaching aspect in a way that provides really meaningful transformation for those people that you can then use as testimonials for a whole bunch of other things down the track. I think if you go down that route of doing low ticket items or creating products that are in a massively competitive market, it's going to eventually reach immense frustration and be very, very, very difficult to grow and profit from. So that's what I will be doing. I'll be focusing on building a tribe of 10 raving fans, and I'll be focusing on what you can do to fill your cup first, which would come from some type of digital product at a much higher ticket point where you can give a lot more value and transformation. And then I think things can naturally evolve from there. Maybe you could even say that someone who is part of that could then be like the best performing person as a result of whatever you do with them, could be featured on your podcast. Like, there's so many different ways that you could do that. And I think if you tied that into what I said at the very start around how you can get guests to share your content, that's how you can grow your audience. That's how you can build your tribe of 10 raving fans very quickly and monetize at scale very quickly while removing so much more complexity that comes from the traditional business model or having low cost items.
That's awesome, James. I was going to chime in too, I have zero experience with activewear, but a lot of experience with podcasting and especially in the fitness space. And I see on your profile that you say you want to help young women become confident in fitness. Go find accomplished young female athletes and interview them. Not enough people are interviewing them. Really give them a voice. And I would go balls to the wall with interviews. Maybe you already are doing that, but that's when I see your profile, I'm like, young women need to be empowered. I remember early on, for whatever reason, we had crossed paths. I think she was a fellow actor of mine. This is like 8 years ago. There was an actress who was also on the U.S. Paralympic team. She was a sprinter, and she was told, and I just literally met her at an audition, and we were talking about it, and then we brought her on the podcast several times. But basically, the U.S. Olympic team told her to lose weight by starving herself. She was an elite athlete. Elite athlete. And the only thing they knew how to do was tell her to starve herself because she needed to shave 5 to 8 pounds off before she went to the Olympic Games for sprinting, and for the Paralympic Games rather. And she didn't know what to do. And then she found us and we started talking, and she basically cut out the carbs and lost the weight that way, and then wound up getting her gold medal. And so it kind of sent us down this thing of who are the people who are not getting interviewed? Because nobody was interviewing her. And I can't imagine why not. So figure out who's not getting interviewed and go find them, because I guarantee you people want to be talked to. They want to tell their story.
Kevin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So what I would add for something for this is, especially with let's say targeting Gen Z, is I would make content your podcast is audio, but what I'm seeing other people do is making content that's native to sort of Gen Z platforms, such as TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, or even YouTube clips. I'm seeing a lot of podcasters that have grown quickly is just take some of their best content and make it into these 10 to 15 second clips. And this is getting amplification on these platforms. So typically I see people just posting the link to their iTunes or podcast, but some of the bigger ones I'm seeing is they're editing these clips to just be 10 to 15 seconds. They get more views or listens on the native platforms, and then they have a link back to the podcast download. That way you can subscribe from there. So that's a sort of a general tip I would give there.
Thanks, Kevin. I would have to echo with all that has been said and sort of build on what Kevin just said, because if I think about your audience and I think about what you just said, Ria, and I think about what Anna touched on in terms of fitness and the people that are not being spoken to, if you think about what you started off with, that you want to do the solo episodes, I feel like combining all the ideas here, if you had the conversations with the people that are not being spoken to and can be role models for your audience, and you can take the ideas that you spoke about there and do Instagram lives or the video or the small short clips, face the camera to talk about them, to promote those episodes, I think you might have a strategy there that would not only boost your brand, but also bring people into your funnel or your marketing funnel. I wonder what's landing for you, and what did you take out of everything that's been said? What is the thing that resonates the most for you?
Oh, my bad. I really enjoyed every single person's perspectives and different takes, and I appreciate everyone's advice, and it's definitely something I'll keep in mind. But especially, I liked Anna's idea of collaboration in interviews and getting, I feel like that's something that people would definitely want to listen to. And collaboration is a big thing that I want to do with my brand and just me as a whole. So I think that's a really good idea. And it's definitely something I will implement. But perspectives from all of you guys and just different ideas, I will keep in mind all of them, and I appreciate all of them.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Ria. Thank you for being here. Brett, buddy, I would love to hear your voice. I hope it's all working for you.
Thanks, buddy. Yeah, it's working now. Brett Scott here. I've got a show called Mastering Success, which is going to be rebranded. I've got a new brand coming out called Supercharged, and a new book coming out. And so for me, it's an interesting topic that you've brought up, because it is something that I've been thinking about. And maybe not necessarily the 1,000, but definitely how do I impact more people? How do I get this brand out? And why I said it was a bit similar to Ria is I know with my original brand, it kind of was, as you know already, Ronsley, it was kind of a conversion from vodcast or video podcast, which was live on Facebook, and transferring it onto podcast. I want to be a lot clearer. I want to be a bit more strategic in the way that I create the new brand. And so I'm going to get some help. I'm going to get some people to help me with that. Being in We Are Members, which is a part of We Are Podcast, has been brilliant. So there's often lots of ideas and lots of connections, which has been really helpful. So for me, it really is about being more strategic and really thinking about how can I create something that's really unique, that's making an impact in a positive way.
Thanks, Brett. Wonder if anyone has something to say for Brett on his topic. anyone has anything to add?
Just a really quick one there. Like, I think having the opportunity to think strategically is great because it's so easy for us to keep doing business as usual, just to keep putting one foot in front of the other, but being able to take a step back, get a bird's eye view on what you believe the whole business and the whole way that you productize your business and your services is very worthwhile, and I think it's important to do at regular intervals.
Thanks, James. I think what was missing for me, everything, like in my business, everything was kind of in different pieces, and I don't believe they were all gelling, and I think that was the mixed message that I was putting out there where people couldn't really truly connect. And as you said, I was just sort of going through the motions in its way. So now I really want to make it special.
Totally understand. I think what happens, Brett, first of all, it's normal when you've done a show for a while that you get to a point where you're like, I want to evolve this and I want to change this and I want to make this different, because you've got all these reps under your belt and now you can do more with all the experience you've built. From a strategy point of view, what James said, you can do obviously business as usual and never do strategy, but it's also the other way around where you can do strategy all the time and never do business, right? You can just stay in the strategy space and not execute. So for me, Brett, one of the things that I urge you to attend is Launch Your Brand, which is at We Are Podcast. It's an hour training on day one, maybe. It's all about your branding and how to launch it. And the idea there is very, very simple. What tends to happen when we are haphazard about our creations are we tend to do things without having the overarching image in mind or the vision in mind. And sometimes what tends to happen is because we are the ones putting out content, we get caught in how people perceive us as opposed to what the actual job of the content that we are producing is, right? And who that's being produced for. So what I would ask you to do, Brett, is when you're now with your rebranding and all the help that you're getting, like I would put your audience front and center. And I would say, what conversations am I avoiding? What conversations have I avoided in the past? I would start to bring those conversations up for your audience and just focus on that and find a way to continuously have feedback as well in your content creation. Because as podcasters, one of the hardest things to do is get feedback from someone who's listened to your podcast. Like, it's such a long process. You can rate and review or comment or send an email, and it's not as instantaneous as, say, for example, Clubhouse or a Facebook Live. Even Facebook Live is more of a text that's coming back at you, but here you can actually hear someone give you feedback. So those are my thoughts straight off the bat. I'm keen to hear if anyone has anything to say.
Hey, Ronsley, it's good to meet you, man. I know I've been in several rooms, but I don't know if we've actually met. So good to meet you. Yeah, and I would kind of, not to be an echo, but just from my podcasting experience, I'm out playing kickball with my kids. So from my experience of building several podcasts, first, I started a saltwater fishing podcast several years ago with no structure, no goal, just as a hobby to talk about fishing. And it grew pretty quick, but I couldn't really monetize it very well because I didn't have it dialed in. And so then I sold it, and I started another one in 2020. And we kind of worked backwards. So we really identified our audience, our mission, our goal, our community before we ever launched the podcast. And then when I launched it, I was able to monetize it on episode number 5 with, a sponsor, kind of a anchor sponsor, if you will, that not anchor the platform, but our first sponsor, like a cornerstone sponsor at $200 an episode because we had the vision of where we were going. And since then, it's been really an easier process to monetize, build an audience. And we built those super fans really quickly out the gate, and that allowed us to grow quicker by word of mouth rather than trying to go, okay, who are we talking to and why are we talking to them? So, and we went the hyper niche approach or niche approach, however you want to say it. And yeah, man, that's what we did. And we were able to move fairly quickly. And now people come to me all the time, like, how do you monetize a podcast? Like, you've sold one, you monetized one. Or actually several of them now. But yeah, man, I think it's just identifying your audience. Go inch wide and a mile deep instead of a mile wide and an inch deep. And I think you'll see success very quickly when you really target who you're talking to. So love that, Ronsley. I love what you mentioned there. And that's what I believe, building a pure and authentic audience is way more impactful than just building a giant audience.
Sorry, Ronsley, I was just going to say thank you for that advice, Billy. I really appreciate that. And it's really got me thinking. So it's really good. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. One of the things is like podcasting, there's so many moving parts, right? There's a great book by a friend of mine called Vivid Vision. The author's name is Cameron Herold, just an amazing human, but he's written multiple great books. Vivid Vision is probably one of his best. And there's a very amazing quote in that book. And it goes like this: as entrepreneurs, we bring on team or we bring on clients or we bring on people around us and we tell them, hey, build this puzzle. and we don't give them the most important piece of the puzzle, which is the picture on the front of the box. And as entrepreneurs, as visionaries, as people creating a brand, that's probably the most important thing that we need to do is give the people around us the picture on the front of the box, the vision. So Brett, I'd spend more time on your strategy than you thought initially, for sure. And I would look at all the vision that you could clarify so that people can buy into the vision as opposed to people buying into, you creating a new brand or any of that stuff. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. It's synchronicity working here today because, I've really been thinking about what's the best way to strategize this. And these are brilliant ideas. Thank you so much, Ronzi.
Very welcome. Thanks for being here, Brett. Please join any rooms that James and I are in for sure.
Hey, this is Sandy Waters. I'm a radio host for over 20 years and help people sound better on their podcast. I'm on the inside of We Are Podcast members, or as we like to call it, the Whamly. If you were thinking about growing that business using your podcast and your online presence, come join us on the inside. I would love to meet you. James and Ronsley, they coach us to get those recurring results in our business. If you want that roadmap, which we all follow to get those recurring results, you can download it at roadmap.wearepodcast.com. Now, here's Ronsley.
Kevin, the other Kevin, would love to hear your voice. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. So my question is, I've been podcasting since December. I'm about 18 or 19 episodes in. I release one a week. And I'm going to just be perfectly transparent. I feel like my content is good. However, I feel like the amount of people I have listening to it sucks. So I'm trying to figure out how to get it out more, how to improve, get more downloads and more listeners. I do it. I've got it on Anchor and going to all the major platforms, but I also do a YouTube version. But I'm just trying to figure out the best way to get more subscribers. I would love to have 1,000, or 1,000 downloads, whatever. But I just feel like it's not getting out the way I think it should. So I need some.
What's your goal with the podcast, Kevin?
My goal with the podcast is to get information out to real estate professionals and just let them know that there's different ways, but also working on and this came after I started the podcast, I'm working on a course to help those same people who are beginners who want to learn how to do better in real estate. And when I say real estate, mainly agents or even loan officers, because I was a realtor for 14 years and I've been a loan officer for 5. So I've started from ground zero, and everybody says, do this, do that, but nobody's telling them how to really get it from the ground. If you don't have a sphere of influence, they're not going to be able to buy a house from you. So there's other ways that you can do it. So I just want to give valuable information and then begin to bring people into my course.
Kevin, that's awesome. And I have the feeling that you're targeting too many different kinds of people. I want you to either target the beginners or the real estate professionals with your podcast, because to me, it seems like they're two different sets of people. And I don't know which is the greater. To me, it seems like it would be more people would be interested in who are first-time home buyers who want to figure out how to qualify and figure out how to become investors and figure out how to buy their first home, all that stuff that a first-time, basically demystifying money. I would think the market would be a little larger there. But that being said, people do target industry-specific people. Like if you want to target real estate professionals, you can do that too. But that was just kind of my initial take on it. So, because sometimes if you're trying to, like what Billy was saying, if you're going a mile wide but an inch deep, you won't get as much traction as if you really start to get into the nitty gritty. And the other thing, the same thing I told Rhea was, again, I don't know your podcast. I haven't looked at the episodes and stuff like that, but are you interviewing people who have done it? People clients of yours who would be willing, because it's basically they're almost giving you a testimonial. If you do a 20-minute interview, a little micro flash podcast episode where you're talking about what did you have to do, and if they would agree to talk about that process, that to me would be really fascinating, because I know there's a lot of folks out there who really want to buy their first home. So those are some immediate thoughts.
Kevin, I'm curious, if you think about who that audience is that are looking for that information, where can you find them? Who already has that audience, and who do they see before they kind of want advice from you? What do I mean by that? If I am a high-end suit designer, as an example, or a high-end suit tailor, my audience or my customers would go to, say, a wallet maker or a pen person or a watch person before they come and get their high-end suit. So they own my audience, but they don't have any competitive overlap with what I do. Who are those people for you, Kevin?
Ooh, that's a pretty good question. I would probably have to, I would have to do some more research on that. If I had to guess, it depends. So I'm not after the investor. I'm not after a person that's looking to start investing, because initially in my mind, I would think bigger pockets. who has my audience in terms of coaching. If you're looking at the coaching aspect from real estate, probably Mike or Tom Ferry. But I don't know if they coach beginners or not. So I need to research that. That's a good question.
And just to add something to what Ron said there, it's like, what can you do to add value to those people? Like, really find out exactly who they are and do all you can to make sure that they know that you have got their best interests at heart. I think in my experience where those things have gone wrong, it's where people are too transactional, but by focusing more on the long-term thing and showing that you're willing to give beforehand. And then I think it's important to have a clear, specific conversation around deliverables or what a success look like for each of you, but by certainly showing that you're willing to lead by example rather than take is it very, very worthwhile of starting a relationship like that.
Got you. So when I initially started, I had a different goal in mind. Now that I've thought about it and I'm in the process, I know that I have to change my conversation on my Instagram page. But before I did that, and I don't know if this will make sense to you, I wasn't posting videos at all, going live on Instagram. So I did it for the consistency. Now that I'm doing it, I've done it 46 days straight. Now I have the consistency, but I know I need to change my language so my message on my IG page and what my podcasts are cohesive. So now I know I need to do that. So, but the information you guys gave me is great. I do need to see who has my audience and figure out how I can add value to them or particularly partner with them so I can attract my audience as well.
And I would ask too, Kevin, I'll chime in here real quick. When you say your audience, have you identified that to be the new real estate agent? Is that who you're really targeting?
So that's where I'm back and forth with. Do I want to help bring a real estate agent who is new, which may be more work, or do I want to work with someone who has experience but want to get to six figures? That's where I'm still working on it, trying to really niche down to exactly what I want to bring in.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, no, good place to start, man. How many people do you have listen to your podcast? Like every week, like downloads weekly or whatever your frequency is?
Somewhere between 15 and 20.
All right, so you got 15 and 20 people who love what you're doing. Reach out to those 15 or 20 people in your next episode and ask them what they're into. Get them to give you some feedback. You might get one or two people, right? But at least you got something. And figure out who they are. What are they doing? How are they involved in the real estate industry? And then double down on that, right? Whatever you're bringing the most value to. Because if they're showing up, man, think about this. And here's what gets me with numbers. I hate numbers. And this is why I've never sold one deal with CPM, it's cost per 1,000 impressions or any of that or downloads. Because I'm building a quality audience. So if I think of 25 people every week, think of 25 people that showed up at your office every single week for a class. That's what you have, and that's power, and that's a starter base. So don't forget about those people and really just give it to them. I mean, give them the goods, give them the value, and even if it's a part of your online course that you want them to sign up for, give it to them anyway. Because here's what people don't understand. When someone signs up for a course or a mastermind, it's not about the content or the information. It's about you. It's about investing in you and getting your time and your energy. And so that's what you got to consider is like, how do I take this 25 and turn it into 50? How do I ask these people, hey, if you love the show, I'm in the real estate industry here where I'm at. I have my real estate license. I refer stuff out. I don't really go mess with clients or anything, but I have a huge network of new real estate agents who are like, how do I do this? How do I do this? And so I think that's the same for everyone is they went to school, they went to class with 30 or 40 or 50 other people that they're in networks with. Hey, can you share this podcast episode with one other person that you went to real estate school with? And I'm telling you, man, you'll be surprised how people will get behind your brand and be like, this dude knows what he's talking about. And I've done it even here on Clubhouse in the podcasting world very quickly, just being present, starting rooms, starting conversations about podcasting. And just like Rod's, like we've never met, or Ronsley, and he's like, hey, Billy's like a legend in the podcasting space. And the truth is, I'm not really a legend. I've just been able to do a couple of unique things that people recognize. But I come in here and I drop value. I have a mastermind. I partner with one of the leading brands in podcasting, but it's really just from giving. It's not from asking for anything. And now, several months later, since December, now I just had 10, 11 people sign up for a mastermind. Now we have people funneling into our online course, but it's all from a place of give, and not, hey, I got 10 episodes, join my mastermind. You see what I'm saying? So don't be afraid to give it all away because it'll all come back to you.
I couldn't agree with you more, Billy. Give it all away. I'm telling you, it's the secret sauce. And Kevin, I want to say this too. I'm only telling this as an example in case it just sparks something in your mind. So 20 years ago, I moved from Atlanta to LA. I started in Atlanta. I went to college there and started as an actor in Atlanta, worked, owned a house, sold my little house in Atlanta, moved to LA where they were scoffing at me with my little down payment from my house off of Langford Parkway. They did not like that in Los Angeles. And I went to hear a mortgage guy talk at the Screen Actors Guild. He was giving a speech. His name is Tim Dunnigan. And he was basically a former actor who became a mortgage broker. And so he was speaking there to actors who are interested in buying houses and purchasing their first home. And so what he had done is found a group of people who he knew he could resonate with because he was a former actor and he knew how to like work loans for people in the entertainment industry, which by the way is even more common now that people are self-employed, people are entrepreneurs, people are, everyone's getting paid with side gig economy. How does a person like that get a mortgage? And I love that guy. He's done all of my mortgages every single time. Like I've known him for 20 years now. But I think to myself, you know what they're doing more and more in Georgia? They're filming everything in Georgia. So like everybody, there's so many entertainment industry people there. I don't know, just a thought in case that inspires something. But you got some great advice from people here. But I just wanted to tell that story about that. Sometimes there's an underserved segment of the community that's overlooked. So I just wanted to throw that out there about actors because everyone wants to shit on actors. But actors want to buy houses too. Just want to say that. All right, cool. I'm done.
So are you saying I should start acting? Laugh out loud.
Yes, you should have a career in show business.
And then go to all the auditions and get all the no's. No, thank you.
That's the truth right there.
Oh, well, thank you, Kevin. Thanks for playing. It's great to hear your voice and good luck with everything going. Please come back and give us updates. We do this every Tuesday. Stephanie, we're going to land this plane soon. We got 10 minutes. Would love to hear your voice. Do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thanks for having me up on the stage. My name's Stephanie. I have a new podcast relatively about the same age as Kevin's. We started in December, my partner and I, and it's called the Viola-Centric Podcast. We're both freelance musicians in the Washington, D.C. area. And this pandemic completely eliminated all of our work. And so we've both been trying to reinvent ourselves. Anyway, we decided to start this podcast, and it's been very grassroots. At first it was friends and family, then we're reaching out to our community. And my question is, how much, and I was especially interested in, Billy, what you were saying about having a very small niche and still being able to build up from the grassroots. How much emphasis do you start to put on like social media? Because that feels like an elephant to try and eat like chunk by chunk, if that makes any sense. It just seems like a really large undertaking. And we do have an Instagram, but it feels like a lot to try and commit to posting on there every day. I guess I'm wondering, what percentage are your grassroots? What percentage is your like social media growth?
I'd love Billy to chime in. Obviously, it's directed at Billy, Stephanie. But what I'd love you to consider is that we have never, until recently, had social media for audio. And when you think about what you do and the fact that people can listen to you on Clubhouse or any of the social media audio platforms that are coming up, I would consider those to be my space of I constantly use Clubhouse as an idea that comedians go into this bar and they land their jokes and they do their reps, and it's the place where you find out what is working for you. And we've had a Psychology of Entrepreneurship Club room that we run. It's tomorrow. We run it on Wednesdays in Australia or Tuesdays in North America. And we had an opera singer that joined us and was asking about some of the psychology behind the decisions we make and as an artist. And then I asked him, I'm like, you're an opera singer. Would you mind singing for us? And by far, I will never forget that Clubhouse moment of him singing opera for us. And it was just mind-blowing. I don't know whether James or Anna was in the room, but fuck, it was amazing. Stephanie, so I feel like your gift, if you can give us on a regular basis and you have a regular room where somehow you find a way to play for us, I'm sure there's definitely a way to do this. I would be keen to see how that goes down as a musician. But those are my thoughts. Anyone else to chime in?
Yeah, Ronsley, I'll chime in real quick. I love what you said. That's what I was going to say. First of all, I'm like the least person to ask about social media. I have a t-shirt printing company that I've had since 2013. No social media at all. Word of mouth, the whole business. That's it. Like, that's all we did. And so even my Instagram was like 700-800 people, and then Clubhouse came along. I spent a lot of time on here because I had a lot of free time because my business was like dead essentially because we catered to big events just like everybody else. And so we were dead. So I was like, what am I going to do? And I just listened to people, and people were like, oh, help with podcasts, help with live streams. And so that's what I began to do, because I started taking my hobby and just turning it into a coaching business. And then when Clubhouse came along, I just spent a lot of time on here. I mean, I love audio, love talking, love sharing, love listening. And it just started growing like crazy. And also like started trickling over to my Instagram. And then I was like, oh, like I need to focus a little bit more on Instagram. Go over there. If anybody Instagram experts in the room, they're like, definitely don't listen to this guy because he has no idea what he's talking about on Instagram, because it really came from Clubhouse. And so, you know, when the pandemic started, there was a group on Facebook. They might still be there, like Facebook karaoke or something crazy. and it had like 700,000 something people when I discovered it. And like a lot of people were just going on there live, sharing their music. But anyway, that's the whole thing. Like Ronsley was saying, like these audio platforms are key. So I would definitely go that route. But anyway, I'm done speaking. I'm going to take care of this guy. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. I mean, Stephanie, as a musician, oh my God, I want you to create more stuff here so that we can actually be in rooms that we want to listen. And I feel like we're trying to innovate all the time, and it's so new, Clubhouse. So I really, really think that you can bring a bunch of musicians together. It would be super cool.
Yeah, well, I wasn't really super clear, and I understand the room's about to close, but my partner and I, we talk to freelance musicians about being freelancers and how to navigate the freelance community, and also to other musicians and like psychological issues that musicians have. There's a lot of perfectionism going on with professional classical musicians. And so it's not so much performing, but it's talking to other musicians and trying to help coach them through all these tricky inner games that we play.
Yeah, the idea here is that you are gifted at the performance part. So while you're having these conversations, allow them to perform. So for example, if you had a room like this and you invited your other musicians and freelancers to have a conversation around what I call a campfire. I don't really call this a stage. We have a talking stick that gets passed around. And if you invite them to your campfire, then you say to them, well, I'd love to have these conversations with you, but when you introduce yourself, maybe you have 1 minute where you perform for everyone in the room. And that becomes your identity on Clubhouse, where you're the person giving a stage virtually to freelancers, even though you are creating a space where you're talking about the things that matter most to them.
Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah, the performance is like the honey. Yeah, so I love that, man. I was thinking that same thing, Ronsley. I was like, yeah, that's what you bring these guys in, you coach them, you teach them, you talk about the lifestyle. Like, I love it. Sorry, I got super pumped.
I love that.
So cool. Well, thank you, Stephanie. I hope that helped. If I was to ask you, what do you take away from that? What would that be?
Well, I love getting different impressions from people who are outside of the music industry, because lots of times we tend to talk to people who are in the same field that we are, right? So getting a fresh perspective, it's nice, it's refreshing. It gives me another way to look at something. So that was very helpful.
Yeah, and I'm just going to, while we land this plane and wind this room up, I want to say that I interview lots of really amazing people. But in January, I interviewed an artist who is on death row, artists and amongst other things. But the idea is that we are all artists in some way. Entrepreneurs make businesses and get very upset if someone doesn't like what they've made. It's all the art there. And I feel like we all struggle with someone interacting with our art. As long as it's positive, it's great. If it's not positive, it's not great. And it's like, how do we use all that? So I'm an artist. I believe that. I believe that musicians and athletes and actors and entrepreneurs and even mothers are artists, actually parents, because they're creating something that's valuable on the planet. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to wind this room up and land this plane. Thank you so much for joining us all here. This has been an absolute pleasure to host you. Thank you, team. This has been a little slice of heaven.
So that was an amazing conversation to have. I hope it was an amazing conversation to listen to. After you've gotten to this point, I suppose you want to know what the next steps are. So here's the 3 next steps I'd like you to do. They're small steps so that it moves you along. This is how you would get your next 1,000 listeners. Number 1, make a list of what you are doing right now after every episode you publish to get your target audience to listen to that episode. I'd like you to make a list. Now, don't feel bad if you don't have much on that list, but just start off with something. Even if it's a blank page, it's good to know what you're doing right now after every episode you publish to get your target audience to listen. Number 2, what from that list are you going to stop doing or change doing? Now, if you don't have anything on that list, it'd be quite simple for you to do step 1 and 2. So this is right. But if you do have stuff on that list, what is not working so far, and maybe what you got to modify from that list. And finally, number 3, now make a list of all the new things you're going to do from the ideas in this episode, or probably even just a simple Google search on how to get your next 1,000 listeners. Like, what strategy are you going to implement? What strategies are you going to implement like after every episode that is going to get your target audience to listen to that podcast? So whatever the strategies you pick are, make sure you pick from where you're at in your business. Like, don't pick something where you'd like your business to be. Like, don't necessarily pick strategy that is for a $3 million business if you're just starting out and you're a $100,000 a year business, for example. And you know what? If you've listened to this is your first episode that you've listened all the way to the end, or if you are a regular, thank you. I love that you're here. Check out our back catalog on shouldistartapodcast.com. Subscribe to the show and give me a review and rating. It really helps me. Please, it helps me get found and help other people know about the show. So review and rating is extremely helpful. If you are a business owner, podcaster, and want to join others like you, like myself, in a group where we share tactics and ideas on what's working or not sometimes for us when it comes to using our podcast in the best possible way, go to wearepodcast.com/group. It is free. And also, by the way, since you're listening, We Are Podcast 2022, We Are Podcast 2022. I can't believe we're saying that because we started in We Are Podcast 2015. It is happening again this year after the COVID restrictions. For latest announcements on Australia's first podcasting conference for business owners, join the free Facebook group, wearepodcast.com/group. And stay tuned next week when we're going to cover what and how to create good brand assets for your podcast. This is going to include good copy, attractive podcast images, and an easy place to direct listeners that want to work with you in your business. All right. Much love. All right. So you still till the end. You found this useful and you have a business or you have a podcast and a business and you kind of want to make it work for you and grow your business using this podcast. Well, you know what? That's something that I have helped thousands of people do and thousands of businesses do in different forms, through an agency in a one-on-one fashion, through a conference, in a group, and obviously in courses and stuff. So please, I want to be able to give you something that you can use to get recurring results in your business using a podcast. We call it the Recurring Results Roadmap. It is years of putting this in practice. It is the blueprint to get results and recurring results using your podcast. If you'd like that, send me a message, ronsley@gmail.com. I want to hear from you. I want to hear your voice, or want to hear from you. So if you've listened to this and you want that roadmap, please send me an email, ronsley@gmail.com. I want to hear from you. Much love. I'll see you in the next episode.